Building it brick by brick.
Hey y'all, sorry about that. I apologize. This is Jacqueline Lukeman again, and I have some connection problems. I always have connection problems. I can never figure out what that issue is, but excuse me, I have been reading this amazing book from Naomi Klein, by Naomi Klein, and it is called The Shock Doctrine. I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see a picture of the cover. There it is, The Shock Doctrine. My pen is in the way. But I haven't even finished the first chapter in this book before something made complete and perfect sense to me in the scope of our politics today. So everybody is really terrified of what Donald Trump is doing right now. People don't understand how he can propose the budget cuts that he is proposing to major federal agencies like the EPA, HUD, how he could propose to cut PBS, and how he can propose put someone at the head of agencies, put people at the head of agencies who are either opposed to those agencies' policies or who've actually sued federal agencies and have expressed that they want to get rid of them, like Scott Pruitt, who's the head of the EPA now. Pruitt sued the EPA countless times, like Betsy DeVos, who is a champion for private and charter schools, and she does not like public schools at all. And the policies she has been involved with, she and her husband's foundation have been involved with, have contributed to the collapse almost of public school systems excuse me, in Detroit. And people are wondering what Trump is doing, and I see people chalking Trump's actions up to him being insane. Excuse me, the pollen is terrible this time of year. To Trump being ignorant, especially in light of his comments from today about the Civil War, Andrew Jackson. And yes, he certainly is historically illiterate. But what if I told you that what Donald Trump is doing and the chaos that his administration is creating isn't, if it isn't accidental, what if I told you it's actually being used as part of a larger plan? Now, I'm not trying to start a conspiracy theory here. I'm not trying to say that Trump was installed as president by certain shadowy groups of people to effect this environment. I have no proof of that. We know about the DNC corruption. But what I can tell you with absolute certainty is that the chaos that the Trump administration is creating is absolutely being used to advance decades-old neoliberal economic policies that have been used to destabilize governments in order to create this clean slate type of society where neoliberals can come in and instead of enacting their piecemeal change, they come in and they make all of these changes that people otherwise wouldn't have accepted before, but they're able to do it because people are so focused on the shock and the terror that they are experiencing because of some event that created a lot of chaos. An event like 9/11, where people mistakenly believe that the U.S. government conspired to allow 9/11 to happen, but that's not the issue. That's not the conspiracy. There is a conspiracy, but that's not it. The conspiracy is that the United States government, or individuals inside the United States government who have been schooled in the University of Chicago School of Economics under Milton Friedman, remember him? I talked about him last week, have seized upon the opportunities that are created by catastrophes, whether those catastrophes are international incidences like 9/11, or whether those catastrophes are natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, and they have used those catastrophes as opportunities to advance policies that push the neoliberal agenda. And what is the neoliberal agenda again? The privatization of public services, the shrinking or the elimination of the social safety net, excuse me, and the expansion of an unregulated market. Hi Helen, thank you very much for sharing this video. Hi Juliet, thanks for joining. That's exactly it, Juliet. That's exactly what Naomi Klein calls it. It's disaster capitalism. And what is happening in this administration is the groundwork is being laid for the neoliberals to implement the next phase of their plan in disaster capitalism. Hi Chanel. Hey Helen, it's okay. So I know I don't like to just you know me. I like to give you proof. I like to give you evidence. So I'm going to read you some sections from this book, and you need to get this book. You need to get The Shock Doctrine from by Naomi Klein. And you have to excuse me because it's windy out here and it's very sunny and it's very lovely. But when I read this passage, I want you to think about what Donald Trump has done in the past 100 days. All right, what he's done and what he's proposed to do. Okay. So let's see. When the Republicans gained control of Congress in 1995, David Frum, a transplanted Canadian and future speechwriter for George W. Bush, was among the so-called neoconservatives calling for a shock therapy style economic revolution in the United States. He said then, here's how I think we should do it. Instead of cutting incrementally, a little here, a little there, I would say that on a single day this summer, we eliminate 300 programs, each one costing $1 billion or less. Uh-oh, the wind is not being cooperative. All right. Maybe these cuts won't make a big deal of difference, but boy, do they make a point. And you can do them right away. Now, Frum didn't get his wish to implement his home-style shock therapy in 1995, but you can't tell me that's not what Donald Trump is doing right now. What is he doing other than shocking the hell out of us by proposing deep cuts to programs like the EPA, the Department of Education, the U.S. Forestry Service, the Department of Housing and Urban Development? And his actions not only serve to create an economic shock, but it also serves to scare us so much that we don't pay attention to what it's all connected to. Because, see, these kinds of economic shocks to governments, to systems, to economies, to societies have happened several times before, and all for the same result, and all implemented by the people who were educated in the same economic lab, who all idealized the same guy, former University of Chicago professor Milton Friedman. So Naomi Klein says that when she began research into the intersection between super profits and mega disasters, disaster capitalism, like Juliet says, she thought she was witnessing a fundamental change in the way the drive to liberate markets was advancing around the world. Because you know what economics mavens always say when they're pushing for less regulation in markets. They're always saying, well, we want to liberate the markets to do more, to make more money for all of us. That's what they tell us. But that's not what's really going on. Hi, Darlene. Thank you. I'll read your comment later, I promise. She said that having been part of the movement against the ballooning corporate power that made its global debut in Seattle in '99, she was used to seeing similar business-friendly policies imposed through arm twisting at World Trade Organization summits, or as the conditions attached to loans from the International Monetary Fund. That stuff is obvious. That's the stuff we all see in public, right? If we're paying attention to those types of things, we see that stuff. And she says the three trademark demands, privatization, government deregulation, and deep cuts to social spending, the blueprint, the roadmap for neoliberalism, tended to be extremely unpopular with citizens. But when the agreements were signed, there was still at least the pretext of mutual consent between the governments doing the negotiating. They always make it seem like governments agreed to the kinds of privatization and social program cuts, but that's not the case because of when and how they do it. Because Naomi Klein goes on to say, I discovered that the idea of exploiting crisis and disaster has been the modus operandi of Milton Friedman's movement from the very beginning. This fundamentalist form of capitalism has always needed disasters to advance. At some point in the show, we are going to talk about what happened in New Orleans. And we're going to talk about what happened after 9/11 in this country in a little bit of length. Because if you think that neoliberalist policies only apply to regime change in other countries, you're wrong. It's been applied here. It was certainly the case that the facilitating disasters were getting bigger and more shocking, but what was happening in Iraq and in New Orleans was not a new post-September 11 invention. Rather, these bold experiments in crisis exploitation were the culmination of 3 decades of strict adherence to the shock doctrine. One of the aspects of the shock doctrine being implemented, that if you look at how it's been employed throughout history, you will notice that in every instance, the freedom or civil liberties of working class and poor people are always trampled on, every single time. Workers' movements, social safety net programs, teachers' unions, all unions are all decentralized. They are stripped of power. They are delegitimized. And this sometimes takes years. But the end result is there are no more protections for working people and the poor. And in doing so, then people's rights are also curtailed to the point where the government can get away with implementing policies that take social support from people, and people are too terrified to fight back. Don't believe me? Okay. So let's let me go to another page here. Naomi Klein says, seen through the lens of this doctrine, the past 35 years look very different. Let's talk about some very simple, really quickly, some incidences that I know you're familiar with, but I bet you didn't think had anything to do with each other. How about the radical free market reforms in Argentina in the 70s, where the junta disappeared 30,000 people? Most of them leftist activists. How about the metamorphosis in Chile, which we are going to talk about tomorrow night on Brick by Brick, which was the first place full-scale neoliberal policies were implemented. How about in China in 1989, the Tiananmen Square massacre? You didn't think that had anything to do with neoliberal policies, did you? You didn't even think that had anything to do with economic policies at all. But the Tiananmen Square massacre and the subsequent arrests of tens of thousands that freed the hand of the Communist Party to convert much of the country into a sprawling export zone staffed with millions of workers who were so terrified of their lives, that they refused to fight back. They were so afraid of the government because of the brutality they had seen from the government toward regular working Chinese that they didn't fight back when the government took the rest of their freedoms away. In Russia, in 1993, it was Boris Yeltsin's decision to send in tanks to set fire to the parliament building and lock up the opposition forces that cleared the way for the fire sale privatization that created the country's notorious oligarchs. And it needs to be mentioned here that that would not have been done in 1993 by Boris Yeltsin if the Clintons, if the United States government had not been involved in helping elect him in the first place. The Falklands War in 1982 was Margaret Thatcher's neoliberal millstone. The NATO attack on Belgrade in '99 contributed to the conditions of privatization in Yugoslavia. New Orleans, Katrina, contributed to the privatization of the entire public school system, where before Katrina there were 123 public schools. Post-Katrina there were 4. Every other public school, every other school was a private or charter school. And in every single one of these instances, the government in some way acted brutally, mercilessly toward citizens that rejected initially the government's response to the disaster. Think about, in New Orleans, people who didn't like the way the National Guard were treating them right after the flood. Think about the people who were trying to tell the media that were murdering innocent people. Now think, it's windy out here, so it's messing with my connection. Now think about all of the residents of the lower Ninth Ward, the hardest hit, the poorest community, predominantly black in New Orleans, who were bussed out of their home and their properties, the public housing where they lived, some private properties, razed, taken over by who? Opportunists, disaster capitalists, who saw in the disaster of Katrina opportunities for them to make money. And there was no recourse for the people who formerly lived there. So what does this have to do with what Donald Trump is doing, especially when we think about how he has unleashed ICE? And I didn't think he could deport more people than Obama, but clearly he's on par for that. How is this related to, excuse me, a president who just said that he has no use for the Constitution? Well, according to Naomi Klein, it makes absolute sense in the concept, in the construct of a shock doctrine for the economic plan of neoliberalism to be implemented and to thrive, to have a leader who is not democratic and who isn't interested in advancing freedom and liberty. She says the bottom line is that while Friedman's economic model is capable of being partially imposed excuse me, under democracy, authoritarian conditions are required for the implementation of its true vision. For economic shock therapy to be applied without restraint, as it was in Chile in the 70s, China in the late 80s, Russia in the 90s, and the US after September 11, 2001, some sort of additional major collective trauma has always been required. One that either temporarily suspended democratic practices or blocked them entirely. This ideological crusade was born in the authoritarian regimes of South America and in its largest newly conquered territories, Russia and China. It coexists most comfortably and most profitably with an iron-fisted leadership to this day. Folks, it's not that I don't believe in conspiracy theories, because I believe that just because you think it's a conspiracy theory, it doesn't mean it's not true. Conspiracy only means that people are doing things in secret behind the scenes that they're not telling you about. So yes, there absolutely is a conspiracy going on right now under this administration, but the conspiracy isn't that some secret shadowy entity elected Donald Trump. No. The conspiracy is that the chaos that's being generated by the Trump administration is being used to lay the groundwork for the full-scale privatization of our society right from under our feet. His defunding or proposed defunding of federal agencies, his appointing people who are supportive of privatization, his lack of regard for law and the Constitution, all play into the implementation of the neoliberal plan that didn't begin in September 11, started before that, but September 11 was the perfect opportunity for the David Frums and his contemporaries to seize upon the chaos and the fear that American citizens had, so they could implement policies that we otherwise would never have agreed to. The Patriot Act would never have been passed into law at any other time in the history of this country. But September 11th made the passage of that liberty infringing piece of trash possible. And with the passage of the Patriot Act and with the invasion of Iraq after September 11th, then we see the wholesale privatization of services for the military. Laundry services, food services, security services. That's where the Blackwaters and those type of security firms all of a sudden were able to make billions, if not trillions of dollars off of war, off of the initial catastrophe of September 11. See, that's why when Hillary Clinton said of Iraq that we need to look at Iraq as an opportunity, she didn't misspeak. She was conveying the neoliberal ideal, the critical and integral part of the implementation of the neoliberal plan, which is to pray for a terrible disaster so we can swoop in and make a lot of money off of people's misery and distraction. She was telling the truth when she said that we need to look at Iraq as an opportunity, because that's what neoliberals do. Hurricane Katrina was an opportunity. Tiananmen Square was an opportunity. The Falkland War was an opportunity. And the chaos that Donald Trump is generating with his policies, his actions, and the people he is appointing to be heads of federal agencies, the terror that he is generating, the uncertainty that he's generating among American citizens, that's a part of the plan. No, I don't believe that he was elevated to this position by these people, but I absolutely know that the conditions that he's creating by his actions are, these people are salivating over this, salivating over the chaos he's creating. So I hope this made sense to you guys, because as I was reading this book, The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, it suddenly made perfect sense to me. And if you want to understand exactly how the shock doctrine works, and I mean in a level of detail that I'm sure you didn't know, that I certainly didn't know until I started getting into this subject, if you want to understand how the shock doctrine works, tune in to Brick by Brick with Jacquie and Luke Mon tomorrow night, Wednesday night at 9 p.m. And we are going to talk about the very first countrywide wholesale implementation of neoliberal policies using the shock doctrine in the first country, in the test lab, where it was tried, and to the pleasure of the neoliberals, it was implemented successfully, and that was in Chile. So thanks for joining, everybody. Hi, Sharon. Thank you for sharing the video. Hi, David. Thank you for sharing the video, and all of you who have. Darlene, I'm going to read your comment and respond to it when I'm done. I just can't read all of it right now. But no, the conspiracy theory isn't crazy. Just because someone says it's a conspiracy theory, it doesn't mean it's not true. We just need to be careful that we're focusing on the right thing. That is the conspiracy. So join me tomorrow night, Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, here on Brick by Brick with Jacquie and Luke Mon, where we'll talk about this some more in the context of Chile. Thanks a lot for joining. Share this video, follow this page. Have a great day.
Building it brick by brick.